Last summer, I paid $148 for a bone-in ribeye at a steakhouse in the city. White tablecloths. A man at the door who takes your coat. 3-week wait just to sit down. My wife took one bite, set her fork down, and told me the steak I cook on the farm is better. She was right, and I'm going to prove it to you today. I am a farmer. I was raised on this land in Lancaster County the same way my father and his father were raised. We don't have fancy restaurant broilers or $1,000 grills. What we do have is thick beef, rendered fat, time, and a way of cooking that most people abandoned the minute somebody sold them a backyard grill and told them hotter is always better. I'm going to walk you through the full method that makes a $12 piece of beef taste better than what they charge $140 for. Steakhouses are not going. Like this video? Good. Let them hate it. First thing you need to understand, and this is the foundation everything else sits on, the way almost. Everybody grills a steak is completely backwards. You take a cold piece of beef, throw it over a screaming hot fire, and stand there flipping it while the outside chars and the inside creeps unevenly toward done. By the time the center finally reaches medium rare, you've created a thick gray band of overcooked meat sitting right under the crust. You're judging doneness by poking it with your finger. Some nights you nail it, plenty of nights you don't. And that's a good piece of beef that cost real money ends up closer to leather than to dinner. We turn the entire process around. You cook the steak, low and slow first. Gentle heat for the better part of an hour. The violent sear comes last and only lasts about 90 seconds total. That is the skeleton of the method. But the skeleton alone won't get you there. The magic lives in the details, and each one sets up the next. Skip one and the chain breaks. The first detaste starts the night before. You salt the steak a full day ahead. Coarse kosher salt, about 3/4 of a teaspoon per pound. Every surface covered. Then the steak goes back into the refrigerator on a wire rack, uncovered, overnight. Here's what happens while you sleep. For the first few minutes, the salt pulls moisture out of the meat, which looks like exactly the thing you don't want. That is why the myth about salting late refuses to die. Give it time. That salty moisture dissolves and gets drawn back into the meat, seasoning it from the inside instead of sitting on the surface like sand. At the same time, the cold, dry air of the refrigerator is drying the outside of the steak. A dry surface is the entire ball game later. A wet steak cannot form a proper crust. It just steams. That gray, blotchy, uneven exterior you get some nights, that is water fighting your sear and winning. Restaurants cannot do this. They are turning hundreds of covers. They need meat, portions stacked and ready. They do not have cooler space to spread steaks out on racks overnight. This particular advantage is yours, and it costs you nothing but a wire rack and 8 hours of doing absolutely nothing. Thickness matters more than most people realize. 1.5 inches at the absolute minimum. 2 inches is better. This has nothing to do with appetite. A thin steak simply cannot be cooked well by anybody, not by me. Not by a restaurant, not by anyone living. There is no room in a thin steak for a gentle, evenly cooked interior and an aggressive crust to exist at the same time. By the time the surface has browned properly, the whole thing is already cooked through and you get that gray band under the crust that most people think is simply what a steak looks like because they have never eaten one without it. Look at what a serious steakhouse actually plates. Well over 1 inch, frequently close to 2. That is not generosity. That is the only thickness at which the technique works. And they know it. The store cuts thin on purpose so the package hits a price point people will grab without thinking. So here is the rule. Do not buy 2 thin steaks for 2 people. Buy one enormous thick one, cook it as a single piece, and slice it across the grain at the table to share. Same money. Completely different dinner, and carving a thick steak at the table in front of people is worth something on its own. Now the cook itself, if you have a smoker, run it around 225 degrees, post oak if you can get it. If all you have is a regular kettle grill, bank every coal to one side and put the steak on the completely empty side with the lid on. Drop 1 or 2 fist-sized chunks of oak on the coals. Even a gas grill works with one burner lit and the steak parked as far from it as possible. You will lose some of the smoke flavor, but the method still works. The steak sits in that gentle heat away from the flame for somewhere between 45 minutes and an hour. It does not look impressive during this stage. It looks like a piece of meat sitting in a warm box. What is happening inside is the entire point. The meat is coming up to temperature so slowly and so evenly that the center and the edges stay nearly identical, edge to edge, top to bottom. That gray band from direct grilling never forms because nothing was ever blasted with high heat. And the whole time, thin blue oak smoke is settling into the beef pie, a flavor no steakhouse broiler in America can. Put on a plate. This is where most people who try reverse searing on their own go wrong. You cannot cook by feel anymore. The window is too narrow. So the next detail is a number, and I want you to write it down. 115. You pull the steak off the low heat when an instant red thermometer says 115 degrees in the thickest part, not 125, not when it feels about right, not when the timer goes off. A cheap digital thermometer costs less than the steak you are about to safe with it. The difference between pulling at 115 and the pulling at 130 is the difference between a perfect medium rare after the sear and an expensive disappointment. Why 115? Because the steak is not finished. The sear is still coming, and the sear is violent. It will push the center up another 15 degrees or so and land you right around. 130-10, perfect medium rare. If you prefer medium, pull it at 120. The arithmetic does not change. The sear always takes its 15 degrees. Let the steak sit 5 or 10 minutes while you build your fire or heat your pan. That short pause is important. The surface dries even further and the interior settles. When it comes off the final sear, you can slice it almost immediately. The slow cook already did what a long rest is supposed to do. Now the sear tap, the part that makes steakhouses nervous, you sear it in beef tallow. Not olive oil, which burns and turns bitter long before a pan gets hot enough to matter. Not butter, which does the same thing even faster. Rendered beef fat. The old pits have been saving their trimmings and rendering them down for generations. You can do the exact same thing with the hard fat you have. Trim off any piece of beef. Cut it small. Put it in a heavy pot with a splash of water so it doesn't catch early. Lowest heat on the stove for 2 or 3 hours. Strain it into a jar. It sets up white and clean and keeps for months in the refrigerator. That jar cost you nothing. People sell little tubs of the same thing for prices I will not say out loud. Get a cast iron skillet ripping hot, fed 6 to 8 full minutes on high, not 2. The pan looks hot after 2 minutes and it was not. The metal has not equalized yet. Give it the full time. You will know it is ready when the tallow shimmers and just barely begins to smoke. Lay the steak in, 45 seconds, flip. 45 more. While it is in there, tilt the pan so the fat pools and spoon it continuously over the top of the steak. Do not stop. 10 or 12 spoonfuls in each 45-second side. Stand back. It will spit at you. What you get is a crust I will put against any steakhouse in the country. Deep brown, crackling, and it will taste concentrated because you seared beef in beef. The tallow does something butter never could. It survives the heat. It fills every dip on meat surface so the crust forms everywhere instead of in patches. And it layers pure beef flavor on top of the oak smoke you already put on it. After the 2 flat sides, stand the steak up on its fat edge. Most people skip this, and it is a mistake. Every ribeye and every strip has a band of fat along one edge. If you only cook the flat faces, that band comes to the table white, soft, and unpleasant, and most people cut it off and leave it. That fat is some of the best flavor in the animal care, and it is being wasted. Take your tongs, stand the steak on that fat edge, and hold it there 30 to 6 seconds until it turns golden and starts to bubble. Do the short edges too while you are at it. What you get is a fat cap that eats, like a crackling instead of like gristle. Pepper goes on after the sear, never before. Coarse black pepper burns at these temperatures and turns bitter and dusty. That acrid edge people sometimes blame on the char is very often just burnt pepper. Grind it coarse and put it on after. The sear, while the surface is still hot and slick with fat, it sticks perfectly and it tastes like actual pepper hode, floral and sharp pat instead of ash. No pressing the steak with a spatula, no stabbing it with a fork, no cutting it open to check, tongs only. You already have the thermometer. Most home cooks handle a steak 4 or 5 times more than it needs. Turn it once during the sear, stand it on its edge, and otherwise leave it alone. When it comes off the final sear, you can slice it almost right away. 2 or 3 minutes at most. The crust is still crackling audibly under the knife when it hits the table. Ask yourself when you last had that in a restaurant. Their steak has already been sitting under a heat lamp and walking across a dining room. Yours has not. That was alone may be the largest single advantage on this entire method. I have cooked steaks this way for years now. Guests still ask which. High-end butcher I bought the prime from. Half the time it came off a much cheaper cut. They do not believe me until I bring the package out and set it on the table. The cattle herd in this country is the smallest it has been since the early 1950s. Prices keep climbing. People walk past the meat counter because they think a good steak is only for birthdays and anniversaries. Here is what nobody, the ribeye, the strip, and the tenderloin together are only about 8% of the animal. 8%. You have not been priced out of beef. You have been priced out of 8% of the animal, and then told that 8% is the whole story. Every part of this method works even better on the other 92%. So tell me in the comments where you are watching from and which part of this method you had never heard before. I want to know which pieces actually travel. And if somebody older than you taught you something about fire or meat that is not written down in any cookbook, put that in the comments too. Those are the ones I read twice. Next time I am taking this exact same backwards method to a cheap chuck roast vie, the cut the old men always claimed was better than the expensive ones once you treat it right. I intend to find out if they were telling the truth. I am a farmer. Keep the old ways. They still beat most of what they are selling you.